Your child wakes you up at 2 a.m. and says, "Why are you holding my friend?" You look around the room. No one is there. But your child insists. There's a boy named Ryan living next door. A boy you've never met. A boy who, according to building records, died last year. What would you do if your home, your safe place, became the meeting point between your son and something not quite alive? Welcome to Uncle Hollow Next. Let's uncover the chilling story of a friendship that refused to die. It was just after 2 a.m. when Ken Tan jolted awake. The apartment was silent at first. Then came the soft patter of feet, almost playful, moving across the living room floor. He stepped out of his bedroom and saw his 4-year-old son, Lucas, sitting in the dark, smiling. His little hands were outstretched, as if waiting for something to be handed back, or someone. Then Lucas tilted his head and said softly, "Why are you holding my friend?" Ken froze. There was no one else in the room, no sound, no movement, just shadows flickering from the streetlights outside. What do you do when your child sees what you can't? What if that imaginary friend keeps showing up even after you've moved away? What if your child isn't the one doing the imagining? Before we go any further, comment where in the world you're watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you do not want to miss. Ken didn't believe in ghosts, not really, not until it started happening again. Not until he realized this wasn't just a coincidence. His son wasn't just talking to shadows, he was being watched. And it all started with a flat he should have never bought. This is the true story of a quiet HDB unit in Singapore, a lost little boy named Ryan, and a friendship that didn't end with death. It's about a father who ignored every warning until it was too late. Because some spirits don't need doors, they find a way in anyway. It was during the Lunar New Year at a small family gathering when Eugene Tan brought up the joke. He and Ken had been friends since army days. Over a couple of drinks, they sat outside Ken's flat, watching their kids play with sparklers in the open-air corridor. The smoke curled gently around their feet, laughter echoing through the humid night. "You know," Eugene said, swirling his glass, "I still remember how you used to say ghosts followed you in camp. Wonder if your boy picked up that talent." Ken didn't laugh. Eugene smiled awkwardly. "Come on, I'm kidding." But Ken stayed silent for a beat too long. Then, with a sigh, he leaned in and said, "Don't joke like that. Something's been following him." Eugene blanked, caught off guard. He glanced at Lucas, who was now sitting cross-legged, talking to someone only he could see. The boy giggled, clapped twice, then tilted his head like he was listening. Ken didn't take his eyes off his son. "He's been talking to a friend for the last 3 weeks, calls him Ryan, says they play together when we're asleep." Eugene tried to downplay it. "That's probably just a phase. Kids make up things." Ken's voice was low and steady. "I thought so too, until I saw him handing toys to the hallway. Nothing there, just air." The two men sat in silence, broken only by the hiss of a firecracker nearby. Ken added, almost in a whisper, "And that flat next door? It's been empty since we moved in. But Lucas says that's where Ryan lives." Eugene shifted uncomfortably. "Has he seen anything weird?" Ken nodded slowly. "The first night, I thought I heard footsteps, light ones, like someone running barefoot on tile. Then the toys in the living room would be in different places in the morning. At first, we blamed the wind. Then we blamed Lucas. But," he trailed off. "But?" Eugene prompted. Ken hesitated, then said, One night, I caught him talking to the dark, like actually talking, holding a conversation. He was laughing and listening. Then he said, "It's okay, you can sleep in my bed." Eugene went pale. "And you still live here?" Ken's eyes looked hollow. "You don't move when it starts. You wait, you hope it passes. It's not the first time." That last sentence landed like a weight between them. Eugene had heard stories before, from their army days. Ken used to complain about waking up to find handprints on the inside of his tent, about shadows moving without people, about strange knocks in places without doors. "You think it's back?" Eugene asked. "I don't know," Ken admitted, "but this time it's different. It's not after me." He looked toward Lucas again, who was now sitting absolutely still, gazing at the metal gate next door, as if someone were standing behind it, watching. It had taken Ken and his wife nearly 5 years to save for a place of their own. Property prices in Singapore didn't leave much room for dreams, especially not for families trying to stay close to decent schools and MRT stations. So when their agent called one afternoon about a motivated seller offering a 3-room flat at a surprisingly low price, Ken was skeptical. The photos looked fine, a bit dated, but nothing unusual. The unit had been vacant for over a year. Apparently, the last tenant left in a hurry to care for an elderly parent overseas. It sounded believable enough. The building was an older HDB block, tucked between 2 busy roads, but still quiet. From the outside, it looked like every other estate built in the 1980s. Concrete corridors, metal gates with floral designs, potted plants struggling under the tropical heat. When they moved in, everything felt too easy. Lucas, only 4 at the time, took to the place instantly. While the movers hauled furniture in, he wandered the hallway like it was familiar. Within minutes, he stopped in front of the unit next door and just stood there. Ken watched from the kitchen as Lucas tilted his head, then smiled. "Who are you talking to, buddy?" he called out. Lucas turned and answered cheerfully, "My friend lives here." Ken stepped into the corridor. "What friend?" Lucas pointed at the closed gate. "Ryan." The unit next door was dark, curtains drawn. A thin layer of dust coated the lock. The kind of stillness that doesn't come from someone being away on vacation, but from being gone for good. That night, as they unpacked, Lucas kept sneaking glances at the front door. Ken thought it was just excitement, new surroundings, strange layout, unfamiliar creaks and corners. But when Lucas went to bed, he insisted on leaving the bedroom door open. "So Ryan can come in too," he said matter-of-factly. Ken and his wife exchanged a glance. She smiled, brushing it off. "Imaginary friend," she whispered. Ken didn't answer. Within days, little things began to feel off. The apartment felt colder in certain corners, near the windows, just under the wall-mounted fans. Toys left on the living room floor would end up neatly lined against the wall. Once, Lucas's favorite truck disappeared entirely, only to be found outside the front gate, positioned perfectly parallel to the wall. Lucas claimed Ryan borrowed it. Every evening after school, Lucas would walk past the neighbor's flat and wave. Sometimes he'd even whisper, "Bye, Ryan, see you later." Ken tried asking the building manager who lived next door. The man scratched his head. "Chinese family, I think? Elderly woman and a young boy? But that was maybe a year ago?" Ken asked, "Did something happen?" The manager shrugged. "They moved, I think. The boy was sick, maybe? Sorry, I don't really know." Back home, Ken stood in the hallway staring at the sealed metal gate. The padlock hadn't moved. The shoes were still gone. The silence from within was heavy. Yet, Lucas still talked to the door. That weekend, Ken installed a motion-activated light above their front gate. That night, it blinked on twice. The first sound came 3 nights after they moved in. It was soft, almost delicate, like the shuffle of small feet against tile. Ken sat up in bed, listening. The air conditioner hummed faintly. His wife was still asleep beside him, her breathing slow and even. But that sound, it was outside their bedroom, in the hallway. Footsteps. Not heavy, not adult, just small, light, running, then stopping. He slipped out of bed and opened the door slowly. The hallway was dark, lit only by the amber glow of a nightlight plugged near the living room. Lucas's door was ajar. Ken stepped into the hall, careful not to make a sound. The air felt a little cooler than it should have. Still in the way that felt too intentional. He peeked into Lucas's room. The boy was sound asleep, one leg kicked over the blanket, clutching his stuffed dinosaur. Ken turned back toward the living room and heard it again. A scurry. Then laughter. High, quick, almost like a squeak. He flipped on the light. Nothing. No movement, no toys, no sign of anyone. Still, the chill in his arms didn't leave. By the end of the week, the footsteps were a nightly event. Some nights they came at 2 a.m., other times just before dawn. Always the same, running, stopping, giggling. Sometimes a single knock on the wall. Other times the soft creak of the main gate, like someone pressing gently on it from outside. His wife started waking too. "Did you hear that?" Ken didn't answer. Lucas began talking in his sleep, short phrases, names, giggles. Once he muttered, "Don't take it, I said you could borrow it." Ken found a toy missing the next morning. It was sitting neatly in the corridor, right outside their door. One Saturday afternoon, Ken tried something different. He sat Lucas down and asked, "Who's Ryan?" "Who's Ryan?" Lucas blinked at him innocently. "My friend." "Where does he live?" "Next door." Ken kept his voice even. "Have you seen him?" Lucas nodded. "He's small like me. He plays when you sleep." Ken hesitated. "What does he look like?" Lucas shrugged. "I don't know. I don't see him clear." He didn't say, "I can't." He said, "I don't," like it wasn't a problem, like it was just normal. That night, Ken stayed up in the living room with the lights off. At 2:17 a.m., the motion light above their gate blinked on. Then came the soft tap, tap, tap of small fingers against the metal bars. Ken stood frozen in the dark, holding his breath. Lucas's door creaked open behind him. Then the boy's voice, "Ryan's here." Ken turned slowly. Lucas stood barefoot, eyes half closed, pointing toward the door. Ken rushed forward, scooped him up, and without looking back, took him into the bedroom. Neither of them slept again that night. The next morning, the front gate was ajar, even though Ken swore he'd locked it. Ken had taken to leaving hallway lights on at night. He told himself it was for Lucas, that it made the boy feel safe. But deep down, he knew it was for himself. The dark had started to feel wrong, too quiet, too dense. One evening, after dinner, Ken walked past the living room and noticed Lucas standing against the wall, arms stretched, playing with shadows. He was mimicking a bird, flapping, twisting, then turning his fingers into antlers. But something was off. Lucas moved his right hand. The shadow moved a second later. He switched to his left. The shadow didn't follow. Instead, it raised both arms. Ken's stomach dropped. He blinked hard, stepped closer. The shadow, it was larger than Lucas, distorted against the wall, but it had the wrong timing. Like it wasn't echoing Lucas, but performing its own version of what Lucas was doing. Then Lucas turned, looked directly into the dark corner of the room, and said, "You're doing it wrong again." Ken flipped on the lights. "Lucas!" The boy turned, startled. He smiled. "We're just playing." With who? Lucas blinked. My friend. Ken knelt beside him. Where is he? Lucas pointed to the empty wall. He's right there. Ken looked. Nothing. Just a blank stretch of paint, faint stains where the wallpaper used to be. Ken grabbed Lucas gently by the shoulders. Look at me. Are you okay? Lucas nodded, calm as ever. He said he likes you. Ken stood up and turned to lead him back to bed. As he picked Lucas up, the boy leaned close and whispered, "Why are you holding my friend?" Ken froze. Every hair on his arm stood up. He turned his head slowly to look over his shoulder, but saw nothing. Just the room, empty, still. He didn't speak. He didn't ask any more questions. He tucked Lucas into bed, stayed beside him until the boy drifted off, then sat in the living room alone, staring at the wall where the shadow had danced. The next day, Ken tried to record the wall. He set up his phone discreetly, hit record, and told Lucas to play again like he did the night before. This time, Lucas just stared at the wall. "Ryan's not here today," he said. Ken checked the recording afterward. Nothing unusual. But when he looked frame by frame at the final 10 seconds, just before the clip ended, there was a flicker, a brief image, a blur, like something had leaned in from the edge of the frame, watching, then gone. It had been almost a month since the family moved in. Ken, who once believed spirits were just stories for bored ants and bus rides, now found himself looking over his shoulder in his own home. The air felt different. The walls seemed to listen. And Lucas? He had grown quieter, still cheerful, but distant, like part of him was somewhere else. Then one morning, the sound of furniture scraping across the floor jolted Ken awake. The unit next door. He stood by the peephole for 5 full minutes. Someone had finally moved in. Later that day, carrying a small basket of oranges, a traditional gesture of welcome, Ken walked over and knocked. An elderly Chinese woman answered. Her face was lined and kind, framed by soft silver hair. "Oh," she said, surprised. "New neighbor?" Ken nodded. "Just moved in last month. Thought I'd say hi." She smiled and opened the gate wider. Come in, come in. It's been too quiet here." Her flat was sparsely furnished, with a faint scent of sandalwood. At the far end of the room, beside a small altar table, sat a photo frame. A boy, maybe 6 years old, smiling with 2 missing teeth. Ken stopped. The name under the photo read Ryan. The air seemed to tighten around him. "That's my grandson," the woman said, noticing his gaze. "He used to live here with me." Ken swallowed. "He's not with you now?" She paused, then answered softly. "He passed last year." Ken's voice caught. "I'm sorry." "He loved this flat," she said. "Would run up and down the corridor all day, always making noise." She smiled, then her eyes dimmed. "He fell." Ken's stomach turned. She continued, "From the staircase landing. They said he tripped, but I always wondered. He was careful, you know." Ken forced himself to ask, "This flat has been empty since then?" She nodded. "I couldn't stay. I went to live with my daughter, but I came back recently. I thought maybe it's time." Ken thanked her, made a few polite excuses, and left quickly. Back in his own unit, he shut the door and leaned against it, chest tight. Lucas was in the living room, drawing. Ken knelt beside him. "Who's that?" Lucas held up the picture. A smiling stick figure with big eyes and short hair, holding hands with another smaller stick figure. "This is me," he said, pointing, "and this is Ryan." Ken stared at the picture. "How do you know what he looks like?" Lucas shrugged. "He showed me." That night, Ken stood in the corridor between the 2 flats. He looked at his door, then hers. Only a few feet apart. That's all it took, for the living and the dead. It happened during a housewarming. Ken's wife had invited a few neighbors and colleagues over, just a small get-together to bless the new home, share food, and shake off the heaviness that had been hanging in the air. They lit incense, set out fruit, played soft music through a Bluetooth speaker. Everything felt normal for once. Lucas seemed happier that day too, running around with another boy from upstairs, laughing louder than usual. Ken began to hope maybe things were turning. Around dusk, guests filtered out. The flat quieted. Ken stepped into the kitchen to help clean up when his wife asked, "Where's Lucas?" They checked the bedrooms, the bathroom, the balcony. Gone. Ken's heart raced. The front gate was unlocked. He flung it open and looked down the corridor. That's when he saw it. The neighbor's unit, the one Ryan used to live in, was open. The metal gate swung inward, and inside, dimly lit by a single ceiling bulb, sat Lucas, alone, perfectly still. Ken stepped in. "Lucas?" The boy didn't move. His eyes stared forward, glazed. Then, in a soft, unfamiliar voice, he said, "Ah, Ma, it's me." Ken froze. From the corner, the elderly woman, Ryan's grandmother, emerged. Tears streamed down her face. She walked slowly toward Lucas and knelt beside him. "Ryan?" she whispered. Lucas didn't nod, but his voice, steady, soft, too mature, continued. "I missed you. I wanted to come home. Just for a while." Ken stepped forward. "Lucas, come here." But the boy didn't turn. He reached out and touched the woman's hand. For a long moment they sat like that, a grieving grandmother and a borrowed soul. Then, as if waking from a nap, Lucas blinked. "Daddy?" he said, confused. Ken rushed forward and scooped him up. He felt cold, like he'd been sitting in an air-conditioned room for hours. Ken didn't speak. He carried his son home, locked the gate behind them, and didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Lucas seemed fine. No memory of what had happened, no mention of Ryan. But Ken noticed something different. Lucas was quieter, calmer, as if something had been resolved inside him, or inside someone else. When asked what he dreamed about that night, Lucas simply said, "We were on a swing. He didn't want to say goodbye." Ken didn't say anything to his wife, didn't tell Eugene. He knew what had happened. Ryan had come back, just for one last visit, and he had used Ken's son to do it. Ken wasn't a superstitious man. He didn't believe in bomos or ghost cleansing rituals. He didn't keep talismans above the door. He never even burned joss paper during Qingming. But after that night, watching his son speak in another boy's voice, something shifted. He realized there would be no priest, no monk, no ritual that could undo what had been invited in. There was only one solution. They had to leave. He didn't tell his wife everything, just enough. He said the flat was bad luck, that the energy wasn't right, that Lucas wasn't sleeping well, that he wasn't sleeping well. She didn't argue. The tension in their home had been mounting for weeks. They listed the flat the following week, under market value. The agent asked why. Ken simply said, "Urgent family reason." There were no takers for nearly a month, until a single father from out of town came for a viewing. He was in a rush, relocating for work, needed something fast. He barely asked questions. Ken handed over the keys without looking back. They moved into a small two-bedroom rental near the outskirts, quieter, older, with little around but forest and a Buddhist childcare center nearby. It wasn't glamorous, but it was peaceful. Lucas adjusted immediately. The first night, he slept straight through. By the third day, he stopped mentioning Ryan altogether. Ken, though, couldn't shake the unease. He kept thinking about what Ryan's grandmother had said. He was careful. He thought about that photo, That voice, that moment in the neighbor's flat when Lucas wasn't really Lucas. Was it grief that held Ryan back? Or was it something else? One evening, Ken stood at the edge of the childcare center as the sun dipped low, casting golden light through the trees. Lucas was playing alone on the swings. The breeze picked up.
For a brief moment, Ken saw his son pause, then look up, as if someone had called his name from the shadows. He smiled, then went back to swinging. Ken never saw the old neighbor again. Her unit stayed dark whenever he passed by. The metal gate rusted. The curtains never moved. It was as if that final visit had closed a door, not just between worlds, but between people. He never spoke of Ryan again. But in the back of his mind, the footsteps never stopped. They were almost done packing when Ken found it. Behind the electrical panel near the front door, wedged between the circuit box and the drywall, was a plastic file folder, dusty and bent. It shouldn't have been there. He wasn't even looking for anything, just happened to open the panel to check the power before leaving for good. But there it was, like someone had hidden it in plain sight. He pulled it out and flipped it open. Inside were a handful of yellow documents, property records, handwritten notes, 2 grainy black and white photographs. One was of the flat's layout. The other was a photo of a child. Not Lucas, not Ryan, someone else. The file was labeled internal, do not disclose, non-transferable. Ken's heart slowed. He read the top page. It was a formal incident report from nearly 6 years ago, well before Ryan ever lived there. A child had died in the corridor, a fall from the 4th floor stairwell landing. Witness accounts were vague. The cause was ruled accidental. The parents moved out within a week. The unit sat empty for months afterward. But nowhere in the public listing had there been a mention of a death. He turned to another page, a memo stamped by the town council marked internal circulation only. It stated that units with unresolved incidents could be quietly cycled back into the housing pool after a grace period, unless a family filed formal objections. No objections had been filed, so the flat was quietly relisted. Ken felt a cold weight settle in his chest. He read further. The name of the child in the old file wasn't Ryan, which meant there had been more than one. He sat on the floor for a long time, the folder in his lap. This wasn't just a haunting.
This was a history. He thought about Lucas, about the footsteps, the shadows, the toys moved in the night. How many families had lived here? How many left? How many children had seen what their parents didn't? Ken didn't take the file with him. He slid it back into the space behind the box. Part of him hoped the next owner would find it. Part of him hoped they wouldn't. On their final day, just before locking the gate one last time, Ken whispered under his breath, "We know what happened here. We remember." Then he shut the door and didn't look back. It was nearly a year before Lucas mentioned Ryan again. By then, life had returned to a new kind of normal. The new rental was peaceful. Lucas was thriving. He laughed more, slept better, and rarely stared into corners anymore. Ken never brought it up. He wasn't sure if it was all over or just dormant. Then, one rainy morning, Lucas climbed into bed beside him and said, "I saw Ryan." Ken turned slowly. In a dream? Lucas nodded. He was standing by the gate, the old one. Ken stayed silent. Lucas continued. He smiled. He didn't talk, just waved. Then he turned around and walked away. Ken swallowed hard. Did he say goodbye? Lucas shook his head. He didn't have to. That was it. No horror, no fear, just a child saying goodbye in the only way he could. That night, after Lucas went to bed, Ken sat alone in the living room. He stared out the window at the streetlights flickering in the drizzle. There were no more footsteps, no more shadows, just the memory of a boy who had lingered too long, not to haunt, but to hold on, to a grandmother, to a friend, to a home he didn't want to leave behind. In the quiet of that night, Ken whispered something he hadn't been able to say before. "It's okay, Ryan. You can go now." He didn't expect a response. He didn't need one. Some love doesn't disappear. It just fades, gently. This story reminds us that not all hauntings are about horror. Some are about love that refused to leave.
Ryan wasn't a demon. He wasn't seeking revenge. He was just lonely, lost, grasping for connection in the only way he could, through the innocence of a child. And that's what makes this story unforgettable. It's not about fear. It's about memory, grief, and letting go. In Singapore's hyper-modern, fast-moving society, where concrete replaces community and efficiency buries emotion, what happens to the souls left behind? Is it possible some never leave because we never gave them the chance to say goodbye? This isn't just a ghost story. It's a reminder that children often see what adults refuse to, that silence can be the loudest message, and that love, even after death, still tries to find its way home. If this story left you with chills, tears, or questions, hit that like button and subscribe to Uncle Hollow Nicks. Comment below. Do you believe children can connect with the other side? What would you have done if you were Ken? Have you ever seen something you couldn't explain? Your engagement keeps this channel alive and helps us share more stories like this one.